What's up, y'all? Grandmaster Even Stirred here. Today I'm really excited for this video. We're going to be profiling one of my very favorite players. We're going to be looking at Timur Radjabov. I have his Wikipedia page open. He was born in Baku. He's Azeri in 1987. Interestingly enough, he was technically born in the Soviet Union, which is really awesome. This is before the Soviet Union fell. So that's a brief moment of history. And this kid was a complete prodigy. We're going to be going over one of his most famous games. It turns out that he beat Garry Kasparov at 15 years old, if you could imagine that. But there are a lot of other weird, fun facts about Radjabov that really caught my attention. One of the first ones is that he learned playing chess at age 3. I don't know about you, but I don't know anyone who ever learned how to play chess at age 3. That is unbelievably good. I have a lot of experience teaching in preschools, and normally with kids that are like 4 and 5 years old, even then it's a struggle to get kids to learn how to just even the simplest pieces move. Just learning how the pawn moves is going to be tough at 5 years old. And this kid was playing entire games of chess at age 3. If we look a bit further, we see one of the most insane accomplishments I've ever heard of in my life. It turns out that he won the U18 championship for Europe as an 11-year-old. Either as an 11 or 12-year-old. He was 6 years younger than Yevgeny Postny, who won second place. And I just really want you to picture that. Just imagine a 12-year-old is playing among 17 and 18-year-olds and 16-year-olds. For all of Europe, this is filled with grandmasters, this is filled with IMs. You know, Europe as a continent in general is the strongest continent on Earth because they include Russia, it includes Israel, it includes all of the Middle East. And he won it. Insane stuff. Insane stuff that he won as an... I'm going to confirm with my editor, but that he won it as either an 11 or a 12-year-old. And going a little further down, we see another insane accomplishment. Radjabov became the second youngest player after Judith Polgar to make it into the FIDE Top 100 Players list with a FIDE rating of 25.99 in January 2002. He was ranked 93rd in the world while still 14 years old. Even to this day, that's still very, very hard to see. Sometimes now we're seeing that with some of these rising Indian prodigies, like Sadhwani, Gukesh, Sarin. I think they more or less got it around this time. But this is 2023. This is an age of completely different information, completely different access to resources. The fact that a 14-year-old Azeri kid was practically 2,600, it's just completely insane, completely boggles the mind. I just want to stress, this is not 93rd in the world for 14-year-olds. He's competing with adults who've spent their entire lives on the game. He's competing with Russians who've devoted their entire lives living in Siberia studying the game. And at 14 years old, he was already outpacing them. So, I did want to mention briefly one other thing. The reason that this guy's a personal hero of mine is because he plays the Yinish all the time. The Yinish gambit is F5 against Ruy Lopez. It's a really beautiful gambit. I love it so much. And I really loved playing it growing up. I relished playing it, you could even say. And he defended it against the world's elite. If we go down here, we're going to see there's a section on his playing style here. He employs the sharp. This is sharp according to Wikipedia, it's sharp. He employs the sharp Schliemann Yinish gambit in the Ruy Lopez, scoring +1 -0 equals 10 with it in top tournaments. That's outrageous. That's unbelievable. I don't think you understand. At top level, no grandmasters play something that's regarded as silly. Up until he had started playing it, everyone regarded the Yinish as completely silly gambit, complete nonsense gambit, complete coffeehouse chess. But it turns out that he was able to play it consistently against the top players. That takes an enormous amount of grit and determination to do that, because once you start playing it a few times, you know all of your opponents, all of these super GMs, are going to start using their teams of GMs at home, their supercomputers, their heavy advanced chess books to find a hole in your theory. But as it turned out, no one found a hole. He was able to draw all of the games except for one, which he won. So, yeah, growing up, I really loved playing the Schliemann, and this guy was such an inspiration that he was playing this against the top players. I remember finding out that a top player was playing a gambit like this, and just being so in awe of the fact that, you know, it takes courage to play something like this. At high levels, even more so. So, anyway, let's get to the game. So, anyway, fast forward to 2003. He's invited to the Linares, which is a Super Grandmaster tournament. It's one of the world's highest ranking tournaments. It's recently been discontinued, but he's invited there. He's only 15 years old, and he's playing against Kasparov. He's playing against Anand. He's playing against all these super strong people. And what you're about to see is one of the most interesting games and one of the most emblematic of this great chess player's personality. So without further ado, let's get to the game. So in this game, Kasparov was white, Radjabov was black. Radjabov is only 15 years old, remember. That's just so insane to think that a 15-year-old is facing someone rated 2847. Can you imagine? I would literally be cowering in fear if I was a 15-year-old and I had to play Garry Kasparov at 2847. So e4, e6, d4, d5. Black is going for the French defense. No Jainisch today, unfortunately. It would take a bit of time before Radjabov would start playing the Jainisch so regularly. Knight c3, knight f6, e5, knight d7. This is a classical variation of the French defense. Black is going for a light square strategy, and white is going for a dark square strategy. f4, c5, attacking this pawn on d4. Knight f3, knight c6, bishop e3. We can see that for the moment the whole focal point here is over the d4 square. White wants to keep control over it and keep the square for potentially the knight to come out and rest on a solid square. For instance, after takes, knight takes, white has a great blockade on this d4 square. Meanwhile, black is going for a couple of things. He's either going to try to win the d4 control, and if that's just not going to work, we're going to see how Radjabov takes measures into his own hands and goes for something different. a6, queen d2, b5, a3, queen b6, knight e2, and here Radjabov gets pretty crazy. He goes c4. This is a very dangerous move. First of all, he's relinquishing all the tension on the center, and that's quite significant here. This pawn on e5 is a monster. It's a bulwark. I'm going to have my editor check to see if that's an actual word. I think it is, and I think I'm using it in the correct sense. But pretty much, this pawn is a monster. This pawn is a boulder, controlling all those squares. It's like a crab. It's got its little pincers. And the idea of this pawn is that as long as this is on the board, it gives white an enormous advantage in space on the king side. And so the whole issue is that if you play c4 here, you are relinquishing all hopes of ever getting at this d4 pawn, and by definition, eventually going after the e pawn. We can still go after the e pawn with something like f6. It's going to be pretty risky though now, because this pawn is now super secure because it's being defended by two pawns. The whole idea was that we wanted to undermine this pawn on d4 with c5, and now that we've played c4, we're going just for a bit more space. Our pawn on c4 is also pretty advanced. We're getting more squares, but at the same time, the center is really locked in, and Kasparov has a free hand on the king side, which is just definitionally not something you want to give one of the greatest players of all time. So g4, h5. White was fixing up for some f5 stuff, and black is just trying to trade off the pawns. He wants to get rid of that g-pawn so that f5 is less powerful and less possible. Takes, rook takes, knight g3. Fantastic move. Look at this. Kicking the rook out, attacking the rook, also hitting that f5 square. So now when the rook comes back, f5 can keep on going. This game is so cool. I really have to take some time to study vintage Kasparov because I've only seen a few of his games so far. Kasparov is one of the players I just haven't really studied yet. He's just a monster. He's just so unbelievably aggressive. This is everything I've ever thought to expect from his chess, frankly. All he does is just attack, attack, attack. He figures out something he wants to do in the position, and he just goes for it. Notice he's not castled. He's not castled. He hasn't got his f1 bishop out. Neither of his rooks is developed. No matter, no problem. He just wants to attack and checkmate. He's going for it. Takes, knight takes. This knight is coming in here. This knight is looking awful scary. That horse is getting really close to the king. Knight f6, fantastic move. Look at this. Bishop hits the knight on f5. And now, through this, our knight can finally get out. Now white has a really uncomfortable choice because this knight is finally breaking out of the cage. Notice that back here, and throughout this point, these pawns had completely dominated this knight here. This is part of the reason that that pawn was so good, is that this knight on d7 was just pure doo-doo. And so after this, the knight is getting out to f6 and possibly e4 or g4. Knight f6, knight g3, very strong counter response. The knight was attacked, the knight goes back to defend, and now knight e4 is impossible. Of course this was black's choice. This was black's first choice. Now black has to settle for second best. Knight g4. They can't all be first round picks, of course. Bishop f4, bishop e6, c3, and bishop e7, knight g5. The knight is going to collect this bishop. I think Radjabov takes a very interesting decision here. He could let white trade this bishop, or he can trade this bishop itself. Which should he go for? Well, Radjabov is a strong player. Already he's 2600. He might only be 15 years old, but he's 2600. He notices that all of his pawns are on light squares. When all your pawns are on light squares, do not trade that dark squared bishop. Alright? The dark squared bishop is the best one. This is covering all the colors that our pawns cannot control. Right? So we do not want to trade this one. If we trade, for instance, then now we have literally nothing to cover all of the dark squares, as all of our pawns are on light. This would be a dark square travesty, as they say. So castle's queenside. Take my bishop, he says. Takes, and Kasparov does. So Kasparov plays bishop e2, attacking the knight and immediately asking it some serious questions. If he takes on h2, knight h5 looks like a big bummer. This knight is completely dominated due to the bishop trapping the knight in. Meanwhile, if the knight goes back to h6, this is just a really bad piece. Black never wants to play knight f5 because then the knight will take and black's structure or black's beautiful pawn phalanx will be completely ruptured. So this knight is going to be really heavily misplaced and disadvantaged if it were to retreat here. Instead, Radjabov goes for an insane move here. He goes for something that's really emblematic of his style. Really beautiful, pragmatic solution. He goes knight takes e5. Now, this game has received a lot of flack because on the one hand, this is technically a losing move, but I think this is a great practical try. It really muddies the waters. Many grandmasters have analyzed Kasparov's games and they've noticed that he has a real knack for just avoiding positions where he's being attacked at all costs, even when it looks like the attack is not justified. This is a perfect example of, taking Kasparov's psychological weaknesses and using them against him to get the W. So, first of all, what is the point? The point is that if this pawn takes, this pawn is going to rush forward like bursting of the dam pretty much. Look at this. The knight wants to come into d4, the bishop is going to come into c5 and crash through. And for instance, if white does something like castling queenside, d takes c3 wouldn't do much yet because the queen would just take and it looks like white is just up a piece. But instead, we're first going to attack this bishop with g5, the bishop takes, and now this queen is tied to this bishop. Now we're going to distract the queen with d takes c3, the queen has to take, then we take her with check, we got our piece back. We have a fantastic pawn set here. Materials technically equal, but black is definitely in the driver's seat here. I would assume black is completely winning. Something like king b1, the bishop's going to come to f4 and start snacking on pawns on e5. So let's get back to the position. So in the game, white played queen e3. This is a very nice response, and this is technically the only winning response. White is shooting through these two pawns, or not these two pawns, sorry, the knight on e5 and the pawn on e6. And because of that, now when the knight moves back to d7, Kasparov crashed through on e6. Technically, material is equal. You might be wondering, why didn't Kasparov take the piece? Well, the point is that once this pawn falls, all of the pawns start to go belly up, and not to mention this knight is also very vulnerable here, right? Kasparov has sort of punctured that first line. Kasparov has punctured the bubble. And Radjabov, until now, has been living a sort of bubble boy style existence, right? His king has been really safe. His king has been behind this wall of pawns here. And as long as nothing gets in, nothing is going to hurt bubble boy. But lo and behold, taking on e5, Kasparov punctures the bubble. Knight goes back to d7, and the queen takes on e6. And now everything is opening up. For the moment, though, Radjabov still does have one advantage here, and that advantage is that he is castled and Kasparov is not. That means he has a bit more time than Kasparov. He plays bishop h4, and now here's where Kasparov really messed up. Kasparov had one way to go for the win here. He needed to snack on another pawn. And, of course, Kasparov is a 28-47, super strong grandmaster. Why didn't he do this? Well, pretty much because he saw that the rook was x-raying the queen, and he thought that there might be some active possibilities here. It turns out that the active possibilities don't lead anywhere. Something like knight e5 looks serious with these threats, and the queen is hanging by the rook, but white could just check on e6. We would have to block, and white is doing fine. Obviously, black has not really gotten his pieces going anywhere. He's gotten rid of this pawn, and white's bishop is just going to dominate sooner or later. Probably he should castle first just to get his king nice and safe, but once that happens, that bishop is just going to go and slice through the entire board from side to side, man. These bishops really paint a really nice picture. So instead, though, Kasparov botched it. Kasparov couldn't take the pressure. He's playing this 15-year-old wonder kid, Timur Radjabov, and instead he plays queen g4. He just retreats the queen, getting it away from any rook e8 nonsense. Radjabov continues. Radjabov plays a beautiful move. Radjabov plays g5, attacking the bishop, reinforcing this bishop, and the point is that if takes, rook g8 is going to decide. It's going to get something here, either the queen or the bishop. Kasparov can only choose what piece he's going to lose here. So instead, Kasparov retreats. Bishop d2. Black plays rook b e8. White castles queenside. Black plays knight a5. And, you know, while this knight has a very good square on b3 to go to, we're still left thinking, what is this knight going to do? This knight is completely dominated by this pawn here. Technically, it could go out to f6, but even then, we're reminded that it's pinned, and f6 is going to be a very loose square here. You know, f6 is right in the middle of things. It's attacked. It's going to be a permanent target for a rook on f1. So black is going to have to figure out what he's going to do with this knight later. It is good news, though, at least for black, that this one knight here has a beautiful square on b3. The knight on b3 is going to target a lot of things. Rook df1, and it turns out here that this is a losing move. This was really insane to me. The first time I ever saw this, I looked at it and I couldn't understand, why is this a losing move? He's just moving the rook to a normal open file. How could this be bad? How could this be a problem? Can you spot the weakness here? It's good to always try to contextualize every tactic in terms of where are the weaknesses and what are the vulnerabilities. I asked myself this question, I thought for a few minutes, and then I noticed it. The weakness is this diagonal. We're going to see here that white is going to be enormously vulnerable in this diagonal due to queen g6 ideas. So black first checks. And now white has some big problems. If he plays king c2, the queen comes in with the bang, with check. The king goes to b1, he just drops the bishop, so he has to go further to the center of d1. Now the king is really starting to feel the heat here. The king is way too close to the center. And now if queen g6 can get it done, it's going to be the end of the game. But what's going to happen, though? What are we going to do? If queen g6 immediately, the knight just comes to f5, it blocks everything. This queen isn't going to magically be able to just hop over that knight and hop over the seed and get the w on b1. So instead, though, Radjabov brilliantly throws in this move. Bishop takes g3. There's no longer going to be any blockade on f5. If the queen takes, there's not enough things defending this f5 score. Queen g6, and this diagonal is wide open. Queen b1 is going to decide on the spot. Meanwhile, if the pawn takes, well, now queen g6 might not work exactly just yet. So it's better first to take. This rook has been, diverted from the f5 square, and now queen g6. And queen b1 is again going to be really painful for the white pieces. I'll give a sample variation, for instance. Like, let's say they play bishop c1, we swing in with queen b1, they take. Already here, you could do something like you could trade, you know, they trade here, and then finally you're going to pick up this bishop. That would be good. I would assume that there's an even better win, though, honestly. But, you know, honestly, that should really be enough. I think another good win would be rook takes e2, king takes, and then queen e4 checks, scooping up one of those pieces. Maybe queen e4 also decides. Queen e4, rook e1. Yeah, this is really a disastrous position, right? Look at this. He can't move a single piece here. If we just figure out a way to involve this knight in the battle somehow, something like knight b6, knight a4, that would definitely do it. So instead, you know, Kasparov's at 28-47, and in this position, Kasparov just says, you know what, screw it. If I take the bishop, I'm completely lost, so I gotta muddy the water somehow. I'm gonna play rook f7. Gonna attack the knight. Black has to defend. Unfortunately for Kasparov, he still cannot take this bishop. Queen g3 still runs into queen g6 stuff, attacking b1. And in this case, there would be a nice bonus of attacking the rook on f7 as well. And of course, pawn can't take now because this rook is hanging here. Kasparov did have to pay the price in some way for the rook coming to f7, and the piper was inevitably paid. He's not going to be able to take that bishop on g3. Bishop takes g5, the queen swings over to g6, queen f5. And yeah, Kasparov just didn't really have a choice here. He has to play queen f5. Look at this. The queen is coming to b1 no matter what. Really, what else can he do here? This is just a disaster. If something... Yeah, there's really nothing else to be played here. There's completely nothing. Queen b1 is just going to decide. Like something like takes, check, here, and mate. There's so many problems here. This is just astounding, like how bad this position is. So Kasparov plays queen f5, takes. Essentially, though, this is effectively resignation because, you know, you're not beating a 26-24 wonder kid named Timur Radjabov. 2600, for those who don't know, is a very strong grandmaster. 2500 is normal grandmaster. 2600, very strong grandmaster. Already we're talking about people in the top 200 there. Rook df8, Radjabov is just playing it simple, just trading pieces. This rook has nowhere to go, and he's just trading everything off. Takes, does not want to take with the rook here. Be very careful, we got to keep that pin alive. We don't want to hang the bishop, so knight takes. Bishop f3, bishop gets out to safety through h4, bishop e3, knight comes out. He is losing a second pawn here, but that's the end of his troubles. He'll attack the bishop, bishop runs, and now he notices something really nice. This king and this bishop are on a line. I always tell my students, you got to watch out, you got to be careful, and you got to always look for the pieces in a line. Tactics always come from pieces in a line, except when they don't. But most of the time they do. So here, Rajabov just plays the beautiful knight c5. This knight finally fixes itself. White cannot take on c5 because then after rook d8, he gets hit by the skewer. Look at that. The bishop's going to drop. This pawn is soon going to drop. Then he can gang up and play bully ball with the pawn on h2. This is a completely hopeless position. Instead, Kasparov plays bishop f7. Now, Rajabov still needs to make a few accurate moves. Look at this. The rook is hanging, the knight is hanging. What is he going to do? Responds with the counterattack. Rook e7, hitting the bishop. Bishop goes to h5. The knight comes to d3. Rajabov has fully perfected his piece placement. His knights are great. His knights are digging into some weak squares. His knight is about to snack on this b2 pawn. Perhaps the king could hold off on things for a little while, but sooner or later this rook is going to break through there, and that's going to be the end of the game. So Kasparov just threw in the towel right here. And there's a pretty funny story that goes along with this game. Kasparov really hated the fact that he was losing, Kasparov really hated the fact that he was winning and then immediately lost. And so to that end, he threw a hissy fit pretty much at the award ceremony. This got the most brilliant or the most beautiful game prize of the ceremony. And apparently he just pulled a Kanye West and he just went up on stage and said, "Y'all don't know what you're talking about. Beyonce was one of the best singers of all time, and Rajabov did not deserve to win this most beautiful game prize." I'll leave a link to the article that talks about this incident below, but pretty much just because chess is sort of out of the general sphere of pop culture, this was an unknown event, and I'd never heard about this until researching for this game. So I hope you enjoyed this game. This was definitely one of the coolest ones. I can't think of any other time in history a 15-year-old has beaten the world #1 in classical chess. It's happened in Rapid. We see Carlsen lose a game every now and then to some of these Indian prodigies like Praggnanandha or Gukesh and the like, but losing to a 15-year-old in classical chess, that's very, very, very rare. So I hope you enjoyed the game. I definitely feel like Timur Rajabov was overdue for this channel. He's really great inspiration for me in terms of the Yainish, and I hope you enjoyed the video. So take care, and I'll see you next time.